November 15th, 1315. Duke Leopold I of Habsburg rides at the head of the most powerful army in Central Europe. 9,000 men, 2,000 mounted knights. A column of steel and muscle and aristocratic certainty stretching nearly 4 miles behind him. He is 25 years old. He has never lost a battle. He has never even imagined losing a battle. Behind him, wagons carry rope, hundreds of lengths, pre-cut, pre-measured, ready for the mass hangings he has already planned. Ahead of him, the road narrows, and narrows, and narrows again. Leopold does not slow down. He does not send scouts into the forested slopes above. He does not ask why the mountain seems to be squeezing his army into a thinner and thinner line. Why would he? These are peasants he is marching against. Farmers, shepherds, men who smell of sheep dung and would smoke. Men whose hands have never held a proper sword. The idea that such people could threaten him is not just unlikely. It is unthinkable. So he rides forward, deeper into the pass, deeper into the trap that has been waiting for 3 days. Here is what Leopold cannot see from his saddle. The Morgarten Pass is not just a road through the mountains. It is a geological kill zone, a funnel designed by nature to compress, contain, and destroy. On his left, the slope rises steeply. Thick forest, fir and pine and ancient oak, their branches heavy with fresh snow. The undergrowth so dense that a man could stand 20 feet from the road and be completely invisible. On his right, the ground falls away into Lake Egerie. Black water, barely above freezing, deep enough to swallow a man in armor like a stone sinking into ink. Between these two walls, forest and water, the road narrows until only 2 horses can ride abreast. 2 horses. Leopold's column numbers 9,000 men. Do the mathematics. At the widest point of the pass, perhaps 8 men can march side by side. At the narrowest, only 2 or 3. This means the column does not march as a formation. It stretches. It elongates. It becomes a thin ribbon of men and horses, miles long, strung out across terrain where coordination is impossible and communication takes hours. The vanguard enters the killing zone while the rear guard is still an hour's march behind. If disaster strikes at the front, the men in the middle will not know until they walk into it. The men at the back will not know until they trip over the corpses. And there is no way to turn around. The road is too narrow for a horse to wheel. The wagons block any retreat. The lake prevents any escape to the right. The steep slope makes any escape to the left a death sentence for men wearing 60 pounds of armor. Leopold has marched his army into a tube, a compression chamber, a trap with no exit, and he has no idea. High on the slope, hidden in the trees, 1,500 Swiss farmers watch the column enter the pass. They have been waiting for 3 days. For 3 days, they have hauled logs up the mountainside. Massive trunks of oak and pine, 2 feet in diameter, 30 feet long. Logs so heavy it takes 12 men to move them into position. They have stacked these logs along the ridge line, held in place by hemp ropes staked into the frozen ground. They have positioned each stack at a precise angle, calculated the trajectory of the fall, identified the natural channels, gullies in the slope, gaps between rock formations, where a rolling log will gather speed and stay on course. Below the log positions, they have piled stones. Hundreds of them. 50 pounds. 60 pounds. Some heavier. Rocks that can be dropped from 100 feet, accelerating all the way down, hitting with force that no armor can withstand. They have fashioned crude crampons, wooden boards with iron spikes driven through them, strapped to the bottom of their boots. These spikes bite into the frozen slope, give them purchase on the ice. They can move quickly down terrain where an armored knight would tumble to his death. They have practiced the sequence. Cut the ropes. Release the logs. Send the stones. Descend in waves with halberds and pikes and axes. Not elegant. Not chivalric. Not anything that would be recognized as warfare in the courts of Europe. But designed for one purpose. to turn this narrow road into a graveyard. Leopold is composing victory letters in his head when the world begins to change. At first, it is only a feeling, a weight in the air, a silence that seems to deepen as he rides deeper into the pass. The normal sounds of a marching army, the clink of armor, the creak of wagon wheels, the low conversations of soldiers, seem muffled, absorbed by the forest above. He does not know why he looks up. Perhaps it is instinct, some animal awareness buried beneath centuries of aristocratic breeding. A flicker of movement in his peripheral vision, a sound that does not belong. He looks up, and he sees it, a log, massive, ancient, breaking free from the tree line above him, beginning to roll. For one frozen moment, perhaps half a second, perhaps less, Leopold's mind refuses to process what he is seeing. The log is so large, moving so fast, that it does not look real. It looks like a hallucination, a nightmare. Then the log hits the column. The impact is a sound Leopold will hear in his dreams for the rest of his life. Not a crash. Something deeper. Wetter. The sound of steel caving inward. The sound of bones shattering inside armor designed to stop swords, not physics. The sound of horses screaming as their legs fold beneath them. The sound of men crying out in languages that stopped being words the moment the pain began. A knight named Gerhard von Stein, who woke that morning believing he would hang peasants by nightfall, is directly in the path of the first log. He sees it coming. He has perhaps 2 seconds to react. He tries to turn his horse. The horse, panicked, refuses to move. The press of bodies on all sides is too tight. There is nowhere to go. The log hits him at chest height. His breastplate, forged by a master armorer in Vienna, worth more than most men would earn in a decade, folds inward like wet parchment. His ribcage collapses. His lungs rupture. The force of the impact lifts him off his horse and throws him backward into the night behind him, and that night into the night behind him, a chain of destruction that ripples through the compressed formation. Gerhard's scream lasts perhaps 2 seconds. Then the weight of his own horse, 1,500 pounds of panicked animal collapsing sideways, lands on top of him. Silence. That was the first log. The second one follows 3 seconds later. Different angle. Different trajectory. It hits the column 40 yards further back, where men are just beginning to understand that something has gone terribly wrong. They are turning in their saddles, trying to see the commotion ahead, trying to understand the screaming. They do not see the log until it is too late. More steel crumpling. More bones breaking. More horses falling. Then the third log. Then the fourth. The Swiss have positioned their timber in a sequence designed to maximize chaos. Each log hits a different section of the column. Each impact creates a new wall of debris, fallen horses, shattered wagons, twisted bodies, that blocks movement in both directions. The column cannot advance. The vanguard is buried under logs and corpses. The column cannot retreat. The rear guard is still pressing forward, unaware of the catastrophe, adding more and more pressure to an already compressed mass. The column cannot spread out. The lake is on one side, the slope on the other. 9,000 men are trapped in a tube of their own making, and the stones have not yet begun to fall. The first rock drops from somewhere above. 50 pounds of mountain granite, falling 100 feet, accelerating the entire way. It hits a knight named Wilhelm von Grubenberg in the crown of his helmet. The helmet does not protect him. It was not designed for this. It was designed to deflect sword blows, to glance away lance strikes, to keep a man's skull intact during the controlled violence of tournaments and cavalry charges. It was not designed to stop the kinetic energy of a falling stone. Wilhelm's helmet dents inward. His skull fractures. His body goes rigid for a moment, then limp. He topples from his horse and disappears beneath the churning chaos of hooves and legs and dying men. He is the first of hundreds. The stones rain down without rhythm, without pattern, without mercy. Some hit helmets and crush skulls. Some hit shoulders and shatter collarbones. Some hit horses and send them thrashing into the men around them, creating new pockets of destruction. Armor is worthless. Lineage is worthless. The prayers that men scream toward the gray sky are worthless. Physics does not care about bloodlines. Gravity does not negotiate with nobility. The stones keep falling. 9,000 men entered that pass. The finest army in Central Europe. 2,000 mounted knights whose bloodlines stretched back generations. Men who had trained since childhood for war. Men encased in steel worth more than a peasant would earn in 10 lifetimes. Facing them, 1,500 farmers, shepherds, woodcutters, men armed with axes, sharpened sticks, and tools repurposed for killing. No cavalry, almost no armor, no formal military training. By nightfall, nearly 2,000 Habsburg soldiers lay dead, frozen into the mud, floating face down in Lake Egerie, stacked in piles where the Swiss had butchered them with farming tools. The Swiss lost 12 men, not 1,200, 12. But here is what most people never learn about Morgarten. The body count, as staggering as it is, tells you almost nothing. What matters is how it happened. The 3 days of preparation that turned a mountain pass into a killing machine. The exact sequence of destruction that trapped an army inside its own formation. The psychology of men fighting without hope of mercy on either side. What matters is what happened when the logs stopped rolling and the stones stopped falling. When the Swiss descended from the slopes with halberds and pikes and began the work that would horrify Europe for generations. Knights worth a king's ransom begging for their lives. Peasants who had no dungeons, no use for gold, caving in their skulls anyway. What matters is what happened after. How the survivors carried stories back to Vienna so terrifying that the aristocracy of Europe could not sleep. How the Swiss took the reputation they earned that day and transformed it into a business model. How a nation of mountain farmers became the most feared mercenaries in European history for the next 200 years. The Vatican still hires Swiss guards today. This is where that started. In a narrow pass, with farming tools, against the greatest army the Habsburgs could assemble, and a road that should never have been taken. Over the next several minutes, I am going to walk you through every phase of this battle. Not just the facts, the strategy, the psychology, the specific decisions made by desperate men that changed the future of a continent. You will understand why Leopold chose this road, and why that choice killed his army. You will see the preparation, the ambush, the slaughter, the drowning. You will understand why the Swiss showed no mercy, and why that decision, as brutal as it was, may have been the only thing that saved their nation from extinction. But before we go deeper, I want to ask you something. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment and tell me where you are from. I am not asking to be polite. I genuinely find it fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Last video, I had comments from 6 continents. Let us see if we can beat that. And if you are new here, consider subscribing. This channel is about history that does not pull punches. Stories of blood, strategy, and the decisions that ordinary people made under impossible pressure. If that sounds like your kind of content, you are in the right place. Now, let us go back to the weeks before the battle. Because the slaughter at Morgarten did not begin with falling logs. It began with a crime, a curse, and a 43-year-old farmer who looked at 1,500 terrified men and told them exactly how they were going to kill an empire. The Habsburgs were coming. Everyone knew it. What the Habsburgs did not know, what their arrogance made it impossible for them to see, was that they had already lost. The trap was set. The road was chosen. The mathematics of death were already calculated. Leopold just had to walk into it. 3 weeks before the logs fell, Werner Stäffacher stood in a stone room and watched 1,500 men realize they were going to die. Not the quick death of battle, the slow death of extinction. Their villages burned, their wives taken, their children scattered, their names erased from memory within a generation. Werner was 43 years old. His face looked 60. The mountains had carved deep lines around his eyes, weathered his skin to leather, bent his spine from decades of labor. His eyes were pale blue, the color of winter sky before a killing frost. He had seen this coming for years. The Habsburgs did not want taxes. They did not want submission. They wanted everything. Every valley, every pasture, every soul. And now, thanks to a single night of foolish rage, they had the excuse they needed to take it. "You know why Leopold is coming," Werner said. His voice was quiet. It did not need to be loud. Fear had already silenced the room. "He is not coming to punish us. He is not coming to negotiate terms. He is coming to erase us. There is a difference. Do you understand what I am saying?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded parchment. "I have seen the manifests for his supply wagons. Rope, hundreds of lengths. Pre-cut, pre-measured. Do you know what that rope is for?" No one answered. "Mass hangings. Leopold has already decided what happens when he reaches our valleys. He has already written the sentences. The only thing missing is the bodies." The room knew what had brought them here. Everyone knew. But Werner said it anyway, because some truths need to be spoken aloud before men can face them. Einsiedeln. The word dropped like a stone into water. January. Epiphany night. Wine flowing and grievances boiling over. The monks of Einsiedeln Abbey had been stealing common lands for years, forests that the people of Schwitz had grazed for 10 generations. Petitions ignored. Complaints dismissed. The monks had Habsburg protection, and the Habsburgs cared nothing for peasant rights. So a band of younger men had stormed the monastery, broken down doors, smashed reliquaries, taken the monks themselves as hostages. For 1 week, it felt like victory. Then came the retaliation, an interdict, pronounced by the Pope himself. The cantons of Uri, Schwitz, and Unterwalden, because they stood together, because they refused to betray their own, were placed under the ban of the Church. No masses, no baptisms, no marriages blessed by God, no burials in consecrated ground. Every child who died would wander hell forever. Every soul that departed would be cast into darkness. The entire community, men, women, children, the elderly, the innocent, condemned for the actions of a few. And because the Pope had declared them heretics, Leopold of Habsburg now had divine permission to destroy them. "We gave him the excuse he needed," Werner said. "It was foolish. It was rash. But it is done. It cannot be undone. And now Leopold rides toward us with 9,000 men and rope for our necks." He paused. "So, we have 2 choices. We can scatter into the high passes and watch him burn everything we have built. Watch our families enslaved. Watch our names disappear from history." His pale eyes swept the room. "Or we can kill him first." Werner walked to the table where a map had been drawn on stretched hide. The men pressed closer. "There is only one road Leopold can use. His army is too large for mountain trails. His cavalry cannot navigate the high passes. His supply wagons need solid ground. He must come through here." His finger traced a line on the hide and stopped at a narrow section. The Morgarten Pass. He had walked this ground 17 times in the past month. Measured distances by pace. Calculated sight lines. Studied where the sun would fall at different hours. The pass runs between Lake Edgery and the mountain. Here, he tapped the hide. The road narrows to a defile perhaps a quarter-mile long. The slope rises steeply on the left. The water drops away on the right. At the widest point, 3 horses can ride abreast. At the narrowest, only 2. Jacob Muller, a timber worker with shoulders broad enough to carry logs alone, leaned forward. 2 horses. And Leopold has 9,000 men. Yes, do the mathematics. His column will stretch 4 miles. Perhaps 5. The vanguard will enter the pass while the rear guard is still an hour behind. If something happens at the front, the men in the back will not know until they walk into it themselves. But they still have armor. They still have swords. They have armor designed for open battlefields. They have swords designed for cavalry charges. In a narrow pass, with no room to maneuver, their armor becomes a coffin. Their horses become obstacles. Their training becomes worthless. Werner's voice dropped. They cannot fight what they cannot reach. They cannot charge what they cannot see. And they cannot escape a trap they do not know exists. For 3 days, the Swiss did not sleep. Teams worked in shifts, hauling timber up the frozen slope above the pass. Not firewood, massive trunks of oak and pine, 2 feet in diameter, 30 feet long, so heavy that 12 men working together could barely move them. They positioned the logs in stacks along the ridge line, each stack held in place by hemp ropes staked into the frozen ground, each angled toward a natural channel in the slope, gullies and gaps between rock formations where a rolling log would gather speed and stay on course. Below the log positions, other teams piled stones. Hundreds of them. 50 pounds. 60 pounds. Some heavier. Rocks that could be dropped from 100 feet, falling faster and faster, hitting with force that no helmet could withstand. Armor stops swords, Werner told them. Armor stops arrows. Armor does not stop mountains. They fashioned crampons from wooden boards and iron spikes. Crude devices that strapped to the bottom of their boots, biting into ice, giving purchase on frozen slopes. An armored knight would slide and tumble on this terrain. A farmer with spikes on his feet could run. They practiced the sequence. Cut the ropes. Release the logs. Send the stones. Descend in waves with halberds and axes. Not chivalry. Not honor. Not anything that would be recognized as war by the knights waiting to hang them. Pure killing. Pure efficiency. Pure survival. On November 14th, Werner sent men to the high peaks. Their job was simple. Watch the road from Zug. Signal when the Habsburg column appeared. The signals were primitive but effective. Mirrors flashing sunlight from peak to peak. Smoke from small fires. Bird calls that carried for miles across the frozen air. By midday, the first signal came. The Habsburgs had left Zug. 9,000 men. 2,000 cavalry. Supply wagons. Siege equipment. Rope. The column stretched so far that the rear guard was still inside the city when the vanguard was 3 miles out. Werner received the news and nodded slowly. Tomorrow. They will reach the pass by mid-morning. We will be in position before dawn. That night, 1,500 men lay hidden on the frozen slope above Morgarten Pass. No fires. No conversation above a whisper. Just the cold, the darkness, and the sound of their own breathing. Many of them prayed. Not to the church that had excommunicated them. That church had declared their prayers worthless, their souls already damned. They prayed to something older. The spirits of the mountains. The forces that moved through stone and ice. The ancestors who had survived in these valleys for generations. Some of them wept. Quietly. The kind of weeping that comes when a man understands that tomorrow will bring death, his own or someone else's, and there is no way to avoid it. Jacob Muller found Werner standing at the edge of the ridge, looking down at the dark road below. Do you think we can win? Werner did not turn around. I think Leopold believes he cannot lose, and that belief will kill him. That is not the same thing. No, it is not. Silence. Wind moving through the pines. The distant sound of water. What happens if we fail? Jacob asked. Werner finally turned. His pale eyes caught what little moonlight filtered through the clouds. Then we will have tried. And our children will know that when death came for us, we did not run. We fought. Sometimes that is all a man can leave behind. He looked back down at the road. But we are not going to fail. Leopold is walking into a grave. He just does not know it yet. Dawn broke gray and bitter on November 15th, 1315. The Swiss lay motionless in their positions. Frost on their cloaks. Ice in their beards. Hands wrapped around ropes that held back tons of timber. And from the north, a sound began to grow. The clink of armor. The creak of wagon wheels. The low murmur of 9,000 men who believed they were marching to an easy victory. Leopold was coming. The trap was set. All that remained was the killing. Duke Leopold I of Habsburg rode at the head of his army like a man attending his own coronation. His armor gleamed. His banner, the Red Lion of Habsburg, snapped in the mountain wind. His horse, a destrier worth more than a village, pranced and snorted in the cold air. Behind him, the column stretched for miles, the flower of Central European nobility. Knights whose bloodlines stretched back to Charlemagne, whose armor had been forged by master craftsmen, whose swords had been blessed by bishops. Leopold was 25 years old. He had been raised to believe that he was born to rule, that his blood carried divine right, that the natural order of the world bent toward men like him and away from men who worked with their hands. He was composing a letter in his head to his brother Frederick, King of Germany, describing how he had crushed the peasant rebellion, how the heretics had been hanged, how order had been restored to the Alpine territories. The letter would never be written. The pass narrowed. 8 horses abreast became 4. 4 became 3. 3 became 2. The men compressed, shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee, the comfortable spacing of the march disappearing as the terrain squeezed them tighter and tighter. And somewhere in the transition, the birds stopped singing. Leopold did not notice. His mind was on victory parades, on the rewards he would claim, on the fear his name would inspire for generations. Count Friedrich von Hartenberg, riding at Leopold's flank, noticed. He was older. He had seen actual war. He had learned to listen to what the silence was telling him. "My lord, the terrain here is confined. Perhaps we should send scouts into the hills above." Leopold waved a gauntlet hand. "Scouts? For what? To find shepherds hiding in the trees? These peasants will scatter the moment they see our banners. They always do. The slope is steep. The forest is thick. If there were men up there. There are no men up there. There is nothing up there but goats and snow. We are wasting time with this discussion. Keep the column moving." Friedrich fell silent. He had served the Habsburgs for 30 years. He knew when an argument was lost. He also knew when something was wrong. The silence pressed down on the column like a physical weight. The trees above seemed to lean inward. The dark water of the lake reflected nothing but gray sky. Friedrich's hand moved to his sword hilt. He would not have time to draw it. High above the road, Werner Stäffacher watched the column enter the killing zone. He could see Leopold's banner, the Red Lion, the symbol of everything that had crushed his people for generations. Moving deeper and deeper into the trap, he counted heartbeats. Waited. Let the vanguard press forward. Let the middle of the column reach the narrowest point. Let the rear guard commit to the pass with no room to retreat. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and the front of the column could escape. Too late, and the rear guard might turn back. Werner's hand rose. Around him, 1,500 men gripped the ropes that held back tons of timber. The Habsburg banner reached the center of the defile. The compression was at maximum. 9,000 men packed into a space designed for a few hundred. No room to turn. No room to run. No room to do anything but stand and wait for whatever came next. Werner's hand dropped. Now, the sound that followed was not human. It was the groan of the earth itself. The crack of hemp rope snapping under tension. The roar of timber breaking free from restraint. 15 logs. Each one massive. Each one positioned with terrible precision. Each one beginning to roll down channels carved by centuries of snowmelt. They gathered speed impossibly fast. The frozen slope offered no resistance. Gravity took hold and pulled them down toward the road below. The first log hit the column like the fist of God. A section of knights simply ceased to exist. Armor crumpled. Horses collapsed. Men who had been breathing one moment were compressed into the frozen earth the next. The impact threw bodies into the air. Men in full plate armor, tumbling like rag dolls, landing on the men behind them. The sound of it, steel bending, bones snapping, horses screaming, carried for miles. Then the second log hit. 40 yards back. Different angle. Different trajectory. Then the third. The column fragmented. Each impact created a wall of debris, fallen horses, shattered wagons, twisted bodies, that blocked movement in both directions. The men in front could not advance. The men in back kept pressing forward, not understanding what was happening, adding more pressure to an already catastrophic compression. Leopold screamed orders that no one could hear. His voice was lost in the thunder of falling timber and the shrieks of dying men. The logs kept coming. Before the dust from the first logs had settled, the stones began to fall. 50 pounds, 60 pounds, some heavier, dropped from 100 feet above the road, falling faster and faster, hitting with force that turned helmets into coffins. A knight named Albrecht von Klingenberg looked up in the moment before a stone found him. His visor was raised. His face displayed pure incomprehension. This was not how war was supposed to work. There were supposed to be charges, single combat, the chance to surrender and pay ransom. There was no ransom for a falling rock. The stone hit the crown of his helmet. The steel dented inward. His skull fractured along lines of force that spread like cracks in ice. He was dead before his body hit the ground. Around him, the same scene repeated itself hundreds of times. Stones falling, helmets collapsing, men who had been invincible in their armor discovering that armor meant nothing against physics. The column was not an army anymore. It was a herd of cattle in a slaughterhouse, packed too tight to fight, too compressed to flee, waiting for the next blow to fall. And the blows kept falling. The logs had stopped. The stones were slowing. And now the Swiss emerged from the tree line. They came down the slope like something from a nightmare, their crude crampons gripping the frozen ground, their halberds and pikes and axes raised, moving with speed that should have been impossible on terrain that steep. They did not look like soldiers. They looked like farmers, like shepherds, like men whose hands knew the weight of a plow, not a sword. But they moved like predators who had finally caught wounded prey. Werner Stäffacher was not in the first wave. He was too old for that. But he watched from the ridge as the younger men poured into the kill zone. Jacob Müller, Kuno the shepherd, Thomas the goatherd, men who had never trained for war, now doing the work of butchers. The halberd was a brutal weapon, an axe head for chopping, a hook for pulling, a spike for piercing, 6 feet of ash wood with iron on the end. In the hands of a man who understood leverage, it could take apart a knight like a butcher dismembering a carcass. And these men understood leverage. They had been working with tools their entire lives. Jacob Müller reached the road and found himself facing a knight who was trying to rise. The knight's horse was dead beneath him. His leg was trapped. His sword was still in its sheath. His visor was up, and his face showed the confusion of a man whose entire understanding of reality had just collapsed. "Wait," the knight gasped. "I am Heinrich von Schönberg. My family will pay." Jacob did not wait. The spike of his pike found the gap between the knight's helmet and gorget. A quick thrust. A spray of blood. The knight's words turned into a gurgle, and then into nothing. There was no time for ransoms. No time for chivalry. No time for the careful rituals that kept aristocrats alive in normal warfare. These were not normal times. And Jacob understood something that Heinrich von Schönberg never would. If this man lived, if any of these men lived, they would return next year with a larger army. They would return until every Swiss man was dead and every Swiss woman was a slave. Mercy was extinction, so there would be no mercy. All along the road, the same calculation was being made. Knights offered ransoms. The Swiss did not have dungeons. Knights invoked their lineages. The Swiss did not care about bloodlines. Knights begged for their lives in the name of God. The Swiss had been excommunicated. God had already abandoned them, according to Rome. So they killed, methodically, efficiently, without hatred, but without hesitation. The halberds rose and fell. The pikes thrust and withdrew. The axes chopped through gaps in armor, severed limbs, split skulls. A knight named Eberhard von Sayn managed to get his sword free. He killed one Swiss farmer, then another. For a moment, it looked like he might fight his way clear. Then 3 halberds caught him at once. One hooked his shield arm and yanked him off balance. One chopped into his knee, severing the joint. The third split his helmet down to the nasal guard. He fell. He did not rise. The killing continued. Here is what the chroniclers of the time could not explain. How did farmers defeat knights? How did tools overcome swords? How did 1,500 men destroy an army of 9,000? The answer is not complicated. It is just uncomfortable. The knights could not use their advantages. Their horses were useless in the press. Their armor was useless against falling logs and stones. Their training was useless in a kill zone designed to eliminate movement. And the Swiss were fighting for survival. Not for glory. Not for ransom. Not for any of the things that motivated professional soldiers. They were fighting because the alternative was the death of everyone they loved. That kind of motivation does not tire. It does not hesitate. It does not show mercy because it cannot afford to. If you are still with me, we are about to enter the darkest phase of this battle. The drowning, the flight, the final accounting. Before we continue, take a moment. Hit that subscribe button if you have not already. Share this with someone who thinks they know medieval history. And tell me in the comments, at what point do you think Leopold realized he had lost? I read every response, asterisk, asterisk. Now, let us watch an army drown. As the Swiss descended from the slopes, the surviving Habsburgs faced a simple geometry of death. The road ahead was blocked. Logs and corpses and shattered wagons formed a wall that could not be climbed. The slope above was swarming with killers. Retreat was impossible. The rear of the column, still pressing forward, had created a human dam that could not be broken. That left the lake. Lake Egerie in November is not water. It is liquid death. Black, barely above freezing. So cold that a man's muscles begin to seize within seconds of immersion. But it was the only direction that was not filled with halberds. Hundreds of knights made the calculation in the same moment. Death by farmer or death by water. Many chose the water. At least in the water, there was a chance. A slim chance. A desperate chance. They were wrong. The first knight to reach the water was a man named Berthold von Eschenbach. He was wounded. A glancing blow from a pike had opened his thigh. Blood was running down his leg, pooling in his boot. Behind him, the screaming continued. Ahead of him, the black water waited. He pushed his horse into the shallows. The animal resisted, sensing something wrong, but Berthold spurred it forward. Knee-deep, waist-deep. The cold hit him like a physical blow. And then his horse stepped into a drop-off, and Berthold von Eschenbach discovered what 60 pounds of armor does in deep water. It pulls you down, not slowly, not gently, with the implacable force of iron that wants to find the bottom. Berthold grabbed for his horse's mane. The horse was thrashing, panicked, drowning itself. His fingers slipped. He reached for the straps of his breastplate, the complex buckles that required a squire to fasten properly. His fingers were already numb. The water was so cold that fine motor control disappeared within seconds. He could not undo the straps. He sank. The last thing he saw was the gray sky above him, growing smaller and smaller as the weight of his armor dragged him into the darkness. He was the first of hundreds. All along the shore, the same scene repeated itself. Knights wading into water that promised escape. Knights discovering that their armor, their identity, their protection, their pride, had become a death sentence. Knights clawing at straps they could not undo, screaming for help that would not come, sinking into blackness that swallowed them without a trace. Some made it further than others. The ones who had already lost pieces of armor in the fighting. The ones whose squires had died and whose buckles had been hastily fastened, loosely fitted. Most did not make it at all. The water of Lake Egerie, which had been clear that morning, turned pink, then red. Floating debris, shields, helmets, the bodies of horses, covered the surface. The screaming from the water joined the screaming from the road, creating a harmony of death that echoed off the mountain walls. Count Albrecht von Hohenberg made it 20 yards from shore before another drowning man grabbed his arm. The man was a knight he knew, Otto von Freiberg. They had trained together as boys. They had jousted at the same tournaments. And now Otto was drowning, and his hand was locked around Albrecht's forearm with the grip of absolute panic. "Let go," Albrecht gasped. "Otto, let go." You will kill us both." Otto could not let go. His mind was gone. Only animal instinct remained. They sank together. Two men who had known each other for 20 years, locked in an embrace that would last until their bones dissolved. Duke Leopold I of Habsburg was not in the water. He was not in the kill zone. He was running. The moment the first log hit the column, Leopold's personal guard, a dozen knights sworn to die for him, had closed around their lord. They had used their swords on their own men when necessary, cutting a path through the press, leaving the bulk of the army to be butchered while they carved an escape route backward. It was not honorable. It was not glorious. It was survival. Leopold did not give the order to retreat. He did not rally his men. He did not stand and fight. He ran. Later, the chroniclers would try to soften this. They would say he was extracted by his loyal guard. They would say he made a strategic withdrawal. They would use the language of courts to disguise the simple truth. Leopold fled. He abandoned his army. He left nearly 2,000 men to die while he saved himself. And even as he fled, even as his horse's hooves pounded the frozen road, he could hear the screaming behind him. The terrible, endless screaming of men being butchered by farmers with axes. His face, witnesses later reported, had aged a decade in an hour. His eyes were wide. Tears streamed down his cheeks, freezing in his beard. The man who had ridden into the pass that morning, arrogant, certain, untouchable, was gone. In his place was something broken, something that would never fully heal. By late afternoon, the screaming stopped. Not gradually, not in stages. It simply stopped as the last wounded man bled out, as the last drowning knight slipped beneath the surface, as the Swiss finally lowered their halberds and looked around at what they had done. The road was not a road anymore. It was a graveyard. Bodies stacked 3 and 4 deep in places. Blood freezing into red ice. Horses dead in their harnesses. Armor scattered everywhere, dented and broken and worthless. The lake was worse. Bodies floating face down. The water so thick with debris that you could not see the bottom. A silence over the surface that felt like the silence of a cemetery. Werner Stäffacher walked through the carnage slowly. His boots squelched in the bloody mud. His halberd, which he had not used, he was too old for the descent, rested on his shoulder. He found Jacob Muller sitting on a rock, staring at his hands. The young man's face was blank. His hands were covered in blood up to the elbows. "How do you feel?" Werner asked. Jacob looked up. His eyes were empty. "I do not know. I do not feel anything." Werner nodded. "That will change. Later. For now, it is probably a mercy." He looked out over the field of dead. "How many?" "We have not counted yet. But many. Perhaps 2,000. And ours?" Jacob's voice was barely a whisper. 12. Perhaps fewer. Werner closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his face showed something that might have been satisfaction, or might have been grief. It was hard to tell. "Then we have one. For today, at least. We have one." The final count would take days to compile. Habsburg casualties, between 1,500 and 2,000 dead. Nearly every one of them a knight or soldier of consequence. The nobility of Central Europe had suffered a wound that would take generations to heal. Swiss casualties, somewhere between 12 and 15 men. 12. Against 2,000. The numbers seemed impossible. They violated everything that medieval Europe understood about warfare. The better-equipped force was supposed to win. The trained soldiers were supposed to defeat the farmers. The natural order was supposed to prevail. At Morgarten, the natural order had been fed into a meat grinder and come out as corpses. In the days after the battle, the Swiss returned to the pass. Not to mourn, not to pray, to strip the dead. Armor that had cost fortunes was unbuckled from cold bodies and carried away. Swords that had been blessed by bishops were collected and redistributed. Gold rings were pulled from stiff fingers. Coins were taken from purses. Anything of value was claimed. It was not pretty. It was not noble. But the Swiss were practical people. They had fought for survival, and they would loot for survival. The bodies themselves were left where they fell. Some would be collected by Habsburg agents in the weeks that followed. Most would remain, food for wolves and crows, until the spring thaw finally allowed burial. Lake Egerie gave up its dead slowly. Bodies that had sunk in November floated to the surface in April. For months, the people of the surrounding villages would find armored corpses washing up on the shores. The water, they said, had a strange taste that year. No one fished in it until the following summer. The battle was over. The Habsburgs were shattered. Duke Leopold was fleeing toward Vienna with the speed of a man pursued by demons. But the true significance of Morgarten would not become clear for years. Decades. Centuries. On that November afternoon, the Swiss had done more than win a battle. They had broken a rule. They had proven that peasants could destroy knights. That terrain could defeat training. That desperation could overcome aristocracy. And they had done something else. Something that would echo through history. They had refused to show mercy. They had killed men who begged for their lives. They had drowned men who offered ransoms. This was not cruelty. This was calculation. Because the Swiss understood something that Leopold never would. If they had shown mercy, if they had taken prisoners, if they had allowed even a handful of knights to return home with their honor intact, those men would have come back. Next year, with a larger army. By killing without mercy, the Swiss were not just winning a battle. They were sending a message that would reshape European warfare. A message that would make Swiss mercenaries the most feared soldiers on the continent for the next 200 years. A message that said, "Do not test us. The cost is too high, The survivors who made it back to Vienna carried more than wounds. They carried nightmares. The stories they told spread through the courts of Europe like plague. Forest demons who could not be killed. Peasants who did not understand surrender. An ambush so perfect, so devastating, that it seemed less like military strategy and more like divine punishment. Knights who had spent their lives believing they were invincible suddenly discovered that invincibility was a lie. The armor that had protected their grandfathers, their fathers, themselves, that armor was worthless against men who refused to fight by the rules. In Vienna, Duke Leopold locked himself in his chambers for 3 days. He spoke to no one, ate almost nothing. When he finally emerged, his hair had turned gray at the temples. He would live another 11 years. He would fight other battles. He would never speak of Morgarten. But everyone knew. The man who rode out of that pass was not the same man who had ridden in. Here is what should have happened next. The Swiss should have retreated into their mountains. Should have hidden. Should have waited for the Habsburgs to regroup and return with an even larger force. They did not. Instead, they did something that no one expected. Something audacious. Something that would transform a nation of farmers into the most feared military force in Europe. They sold themselves. The skills that had destroyed Leopold, discipline, terrain mastery, the unflinching willingness to kill without hesitation. These were valuable commodities in a Europe that was constantly at war. Kings and dukes who had feared the Swiss now wanted to hire them. Wanted them at the vanguard of their own armies. Wanted to deploy their reputation as a weapon. Swiss mercenaries became a product. An export. A business model built on the corpses of Morgarten. The halberd gave way to the pike, 18 feet of sharpened wood that could be massed in formation to create a moving wall of death. The pike square became the terror of European battlefields for the next 200 years. Cavalry that had dominated warfare since the fall of Rome suddenly found itself obsolete. And at the heart of it all was a reputation. The Swiss do not take prisoners. The Swiss do not show mercy. The Swiss will fight to the last man and take you with them. This reputation was not accidental. It was cultivated. Every time a Swiss mercenary company refused to surrender, every time they died rather than retreated, they were reinforcing a brand that had been forged in the blood of Morgarten. And that brand was worth more than gold. Morgarten taught the Swiss a lesson they would never forget. Peace is not granted by the goodwill of neighbors. Peace is not maintained by treaties and promises. Peace is secured by making yourself so painful to attack that the cost becomes prohibitive. The Habsburgs would return. Everyone knew it. They would spend generations trying to avenge Morgarten, trying to reclaim the Alpine territories, trying to crush the rebellion that had shattered their army. They would fail. Every time. Because the Swiss had learned that survival required more than courage. It required the absolute refusal to accept any outcome other than victory. It required the willingness to use every advantage, terrain, preparation, psychology, without hesitation. It required the understanding that mercy was a luxury they could not afford. This philosophy would eventually transform Switzerland into something unique in European history, an armed neutral state, a porcupine in the heart of the continent, peaceful when left alone, but deadly when touched. The Vatican still hires Swiss guards today. They have protected the Pope for over 500 years. This is where that started, in a frozen pass, with farming tools, and the absolute refusal to die. If you travel to the shores of Lake Egerie today, the silence has returned. The water is clear again, cold and beautiful. The mountains rise as they have for millennia, indifferent to human suffering, indifferent to empires that have risen and fallen in their shadows. A simple stone monument stands near the road, overlooking the place where the slaughter occurred. It is modest, unassuming. Most travelers pass it without stopping. The inscription is brief. It lists the date, the participants, the outcome. It does not describe the screaming. It does not mention the drowning. It does not explain how the water turned red. But if you stand there long enough, in the quiet of a November afternoon, you can almost feel it. The weight of what happened. The echo of 1,500 men who refused to accept their fate. The echo of Duke Leopold, riding into the pass with rope for hangings, riding out with nothing but his life and his nightmares. The echo of a lesson that has been taught over and over throughout history, but that empires keep forgetting. The powerful are not invincible. The weak are not helpless. And sometimes, when you push people far enough, they push back in ways you never imagined. Duke Leopold I of Habsburg died in 1326, 11 years after Morgarten. He never returned to the Swiss territories. He never avenged his army. He spent the rest of his life fighting other battles, winning some, losing others, but never recovering the certainty that had carried him into that mountain pass. The chronicles describe a man who flinched at sudden sounds, who avoided narrow roads, who never spoke of what he had seen. Werner Stäffacher died in 1329, an old man by the standards of his time. He lived long enough to see the Habsburgs try again and fail again. He lived long enough to see Swiss mercenaries hired by kings across Europe. He lived long enough to know that what he had built, that desperate, bloody, brilliant trap, had changed history. The confederation he helped save would grow, would strengthen, would become a nation, but it would never forget where it came from. Every year, on November 15th, the Swiss remember Morgarten. Not with celebration, not with pride, with something more complicated, something that acknowledges the horror of what was done and the necessity of it. They remember that survival has a price, and sometimes the price is very, very high. Here is what I want you to take from this story. Not the body count, not the tactics, not even the historical significance. I want you to remember the men on that slope. Farmers with halberds, shepherds with axes, men who had been told their souls were damned, their cause was hopeless, their deaths were certain. They fought anyway, and they won. History is full of moments like this. Moments when ordinary people, pushed to the edge, discover that they are capable of extraordinary things. Moments when the powerful learn that power has limits. These are the stories I tell on this channel. Not the sanitized versions. Not the comfortable versions. The real versions. Blood and strategy, and the decisions that shaped the world we live in. If this story changed how you think about power, about survival, about what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept their fate, share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. ***. Subscribe if you have not already. The notification bell matters more than you think. ***. And leave me a comment. Tell me, what would you have done in Werner Stäffacher's position, facing an army 6 times your size? Knowing that mercy meant extinction. Knowing that survival meant becoming something you never imagined. Asterisk asterisk. I read every comment. I want to know what you think. Asterisk asterisk. This has been Dark History Exhumed. I will see you in the next one. Asterisk.